The fabric of the dress was a deep, forest green silk that felt cool against her skin. Eleanor Vance smoothed it over her knee for the 10th time, a nervous habit she detested. The bistro was charming, all warm wood and low lighting, but the charm had curdled over the last 45 minutes. Her date, a man named Dante arranged by a well-meaning but meddlesome colleague, was late. Not fashionably late. He was insultingly, unequivocally late. She had already decided to finish her glass of wine, pay her half of the reservation fee, and leave. At 40, she had no time for games or for men who could not master the simple mechanics of a clock. The world she thought she was in was one of polite apologies and a wasted evening. But the world she was actually in announced itself with a sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. The low hum of conversation did not stop, but it thinned, becoming brittle. A man had entered. He did not move with hurry or apology. He moved like the room owed him space, and the air complied, parting for him. He was tall, dressed in a suit so dark it seemed to drink the light, tailored with a precision that bespoke immense expense and zero flamboyance. His hair was black, thick, with stark threads of silver at the temples that did not soften him. They sharpened him. He scanned the room, his gaze sweeping past faces with an unnerving lack of interest until it landed on her. Anne stopped. Now she could not leave. His eyes were a dark, flat brown, and they did not hold the apologetic sheepishness of a late blind date. They held an assessment. It was cold, thorough, and utterly devoid of the social pleasantries she expected. He walked to her table, each step deliberate. He did not offer a hand or a smile. "You are Eleanor," he said. It was not a question. His voice was a low baritone, gravelly and quiet, yet it cut through the bistro's noise as if it were the only sound that mattered. "And you're late," she replied, her voice cooler than she intended. She refused to be intimidated. She was an art historian, a woman who spent her days with the dead and the priceless. She had faced down museum boards and billionaire collectors. This man was just a man. A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, passed through his eyes before being extinguished. He took the seat opposite her without being invited. The waiter, who had been ignoring her for the past 20 minutes, materialized instantly, his posture deferential. "Mr. Moretti, what can I get for you?" "Bring a bottle of the Barolo." "The Reserve," Dante Moretti said, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. The waiter scurried away. "You didn't ask if I wanted red wine," Eleanor noted, lifting her chin. "Do you?" "As it happens, I do." "That isn't the point." "The point," he said, leaning forward slightly, his hands resting on the table, "is that you are not what I was led to expect." Eleanor felt a flash of irritation. "And what, precisely, were you led to expect? Someone younger? Blonder? Someone who would be grateful you bothered to show up at all." The words were out before she could stop them. They hung in the air, sharp and defiant. He did not react with anger. He simply watched her, his stillness more unnerving than any outburst would have been. She saw a thin, white scar cutting through his left eyebrow, a detail that was both jarring and strangely fitting. "I was led to expect a suitable distraction," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "A placeholder for an evening I did not wish to spend alone. My associate has a limited imagination." The wine arrived. The waiter poured a taste for Dante, who waved it away. "Pour for the lady," the waiter, flustered, poured a glass for Eleanor. Dante watched her as she lifted it, his gaze so focused it felt like a physical touch. She took a slow, deliberate sip, refusing to let him see how his intensity was beginning to fray the edges of her composure. The wine was exceptional, rich and complex. "And am I not a suitable distraction?" she asked, setting the glass down with a soft click. "No," he said. The word was absolute. "You are not a distraction at all. You are clear." Focused, he seemed to be speaking more to himself than to her. He looked at her hair, where the gray streaked through the dark brown at her temples, mirroring his own. He looked at the fine lines around her eyes, the lines of a woman who had lived, who had looked at the world and had not flinched. He did not see age. He saw substance. The conversation that followed was a strange, tense dance. She told him about her work, about authenticating a lost Renaissance portrait, the thrill of finding the artist's hidden signature under layers of varnish. He listened with an unnerving focus. He spoke of his own business, imports, he called it, in terms of loyalty, family, and debts. They were talking about two entirely different worlds, yet the underlying principles of value, authenticity, and consequence seemed to intertwine. She found herself forgetting he was rude, forgetting he was late, and instead becoming fascinated by the sheer, unyielding force of his presence. She was telling a story about a clever forgery she had once exposed, detailing the anachronistic pigment used in the blue of a Madonna's robe when the bistro's front window exploded inward. The sound was a deafening roar of shattering glass and splintering wood. Screams erupted. Chaos bloomed. But before Eleanor could fully process what was happening, Dante was moving. He was not a man in a suit anymore. He was a predator, all coiled grace and lethal intent. In one fluid motion, he had swept his arm across the table, knocking over glasses and plates, and pulled her down, shielding her body with his own. "Stay down," he commanded, the words a low growl in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. The scent of him was cedar and something else, something metallic and cold like gunpowder. The world devolved into a series of terrifying snapshots. The pop-pop-pop of gunfire. The smell of cordite sharp in the air. Men in dark coats moving through the restaurant, their faces grim. And Dante, a dark shape in the flickering lights, moving with a brutal efficiency that turned her blood to ice. He pulled a gun from somewhere inside his perfect suit, and it looked as natural in his hand as a pen might in hers. He never left her side. His left hand was clamped on her arm, a firm, possessive grip that was both terrifying and, in a strange, primal way, reassuring. He moved them backward, using overturned tables as cover, his body a constant shield. She saw him fire twice. 2 precise shots. The men who had been advancing on them fell, without a sound. It was surgical. It was horrifying. He pushed her through the kitchen, the air thick with the smell of garlic and fear. Chefs and dishwashers were huddled against the stainless steel counters, their eyes wide. Dante ignored them, his focus absolute. He kicked open a rear exit, and they were plunged into the cold night air of a dirty alley. A black sedan was waiting, its engine humming. A man jumped out of the driver's seat. "Boss, are you all right? Get in the car, Eleanor," Dante ordered. Her mind was screaming. This was a nightmare. A mob hit. She was a civilian, an art historian. She had a lecture to prepare for on Monday. She looked from Dante's hard face to the open car door. She could run. She could scream. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that running would be a fatal mistake. The men who had shot up the restaurant were not just after him. Now they were after anyone who had been with him. She got in the car. The door slammed shut, sealing her inside the silent, leather-scented interior. She thought she could just go home, call the police, and forget the terrifying man from the disastrous blind date. But as the car sped away, the city lights blurring into long, frantic streaks, she knew that was a lie. She was in his car, in his world, a witness to murder and a prisoner in a war she hadn't known existed. Her old life had ended the moment that window shattered. The penthouse was a study in cold, masculine luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a glittering panorama of the city, but the view felt less like a feature and more like a surveillance post. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, and unwelcoming. It was a space designed for control, not comfort. Art hung on the walls, but it was all abstract, geometric pieces that spoke of investment, not passion. Dante poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. "Whiskey." She took it, her hand surprisingly steady. Shock, she supposed, was a temporary armor. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. He took a drink from his own glass, watching her over the rim. "You know who I am. I know your name is Dante Moretti. I know people try to kill you in restaurants. That's a rather incomplete biography." He almost smiled. It was a ghost of an expression, a slight tightening at the corner of his mouth that did not reach his eyes. It is the only part of my biography that matters tonight. You are a witness. The Falcone family will not leave loose ends. The Falcones. The name meant nothing to her. My competition, the way he said the word made it sound like a synonym for plague. They are neither patient nor subtle. They now know a woman was with me. They will look for you. So what happens to me? She asked, facing him squarely. Am I a guest? A prisoner? A loose end for you to tie up? His eyes narrowed. You are under my protection. For now, that is the same as being a prisoner. The days that followed were a surreal exercise in confinement. She was given a luxurious guest suite with a view that stretched to the horizon, but the door locked from the outside. A silent woman brought her meals. Dante was a sporadic presence, coming and going at odd hours, always dressed in those immaculate suits, always carrying the weight of his world in the rigid set of his shoulders. He would sit with her in the evenings, the city lights a silent audience. He asked about her work, her life, with a probing curiosity. He was assessing her, she knew, looking for weaknesses. But she found herself answering honestly, telling him about her quiet, orderly life, a life that seemed a universe away from this violent cage. In turn, she watched him. She noticed the way he checked the security feeds on his phone obsessively, the way his hands, always so still, would clench when he thought she wasn't looking. She saw the exhaustion etched beneath his cold control. One evening, she found him in his study, a room she had not yet been allowed to enter. He was standing before a large, oil-on-canvas portrait. It depicted a woman with warm, laughing eyes and dark hair piled high. It was a stark contrast to the abstract art in the rest of the penthouse. It was a painting filled with love. Eleanor stopped in the doorway. As an art historian, she recognized the artist's style immediately. It was a contemporary painter known for his soulful, intimate portraits. This was not an investment piece. This was personal. She was beautiful, Eleanor said softly. Dante did not turn. Her name was Sophia. My wife. Was. She died 8 years ago, he said, his voice flat, stripped of all emotion. A car bomb. It was meant for me. There it was. The wound. The ghost that haunted this cold, empty fortress. The reason he looked at Eleanor with such confusing intensity. She was not a replacement. She was a reminder of what could be lost. I'm sorry, she said. The words felt small, inadequate. He finally turned to face her. The mask of the unfeeling boss was gone. In its place was a raw, aching grief that he had clearly carried alone for years. The men who did this, they were from the Falcone family. The danger was not just business. It was a vendetta, and she was now standing in the middle of it. The next day, the Falcones escalated. A news report flickered on the large television in the living area. A police sketch. It was a crude drawing, but it was unmistakably her. An anonymous tip had named a woman in a green dress seen fleeing the bistro. They were hunting her in the open now, using the law as one of their weapons. Dante turned off the television. The silence in the room was heavy. I can make you disappear, he said. A new name, a new life. Far from here. You would be safe. It was an exit. A clean break. She could take it, go back to a semblance of her old life, and forget this brutal, charismatic man and his world of ghosts and guns. She should have felt relief. Instead, a cold dread washed over her. She looked at the bank of security monitors he had been studying. She saw the street below, the black cars that passed too frequently, the men on the corners who were trying too hard to look casual. They weren't just looking for her. They were waiting for him. They were using her as bait, knowing he would have to move her, exposing himself. They're boxing you in, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She pointed to a delivery van parked across the street. That van. It's been there for 3 hours. The logo is for a flower shop, but no one has gone in or out. Dante's gaze sharpened. He zoomed in on the van. He looked at her, a new respect dawning in his eyes. He had been so focused on the overt threats, he had missed the subtle one. She, with her historian's eye for details that were out of place, had seen it instantly. "You should go," he said again, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," she said, her decision crystallizing in that moment. "If I leave, they'll get you."
I'm staying.
It was not a choice for him, or for a future she could not imagine. It was a choice for survival, for the only person in this war who had tried to keep her safe. He stood close to her, their shoulders almost touching as they both watched the monitors. His hand, as if by accident, brushed against hers. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through her, a current of heat and danger and something else she refused to name. He did not pull away. Because she had chosen to stay, he saw her not as a liability to be hidden, but as an ally, an unexpected piece on the board. Therefore, he had to bring her deeper. He had to show her what she was choosing to be a part of. The next evening, he led her to a meeting in the penthouse's large dining room. 6 men were seated around the polished mahogany table. They all stood when Dante entered. Their deference was absolute. They were his capos, his most trusted lieutenants. Their eyes flickered to Eleanor, a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "She stays," Dante said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He seated her in the chair to his right, a position of honor and visibility. The meeting was a war council. They spoke of territories, shipments, and the escalating aggression from the Falcons. One man, a younger capo named Marco with restless eyes, argued for a truce. "We offer them a piece of the docks. We show good faith. It ends the bloodshed." Dante listened, his face an unreadable mask. But Eleanor watched Marco. She had spent her life studying portraits, learning to read the truth of a subject's character in the tension of a painted jaw, the shadow in an eye. Marco's arguments were impassioned, but his gaze kept sliding away from Dante's. His hands fidgeted with a pen. He was performing sincerity, not feeling it.
He was a forgery.
Later, after the men had left, she found Dante staring out at the city again. The weight of his decisions seemed to press down on him. "Marco is lying to you," she said quietly. He turned slowly, his eyes searching her face. "That is a serious accusation. He has been with my family for 20 years. "I know what I saw," she insisted. "He's afraid of you, but he's more afraid of something else. He's selling you out to the Falcons. His talk of a truce is a trap. She had no proof. Only a lifetime of expertise in spotting the inauthentic. To make such a claim against a made man was to sign her own death warrant if she was wrong." Dante stepped closer, invading her space until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Why are you telling me this?" His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. "You could have stayed silent, protected yourself." She did not back down. She held his intense gaze, the whole world narrowing to the space between them. "Because if I stay silent," she said, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart, "they'll kill you." That was it. The confession. Not of love, but of allegiance. An acknowledgement that his fate was now tied to hers. A flicker of something raw and vulnerable crossed his face before the mask slammed back into place. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of gray hair from her temple. It was the first time he had touched her with anything other than urgent, protective force. It was a gesture of startling tenderness. "I know," he said softly. He had seen it too, but he had allowed loyalty to cloud his judgment. Her clarity had cut through it. He began to move, setting a plan in motion to expose the traitor. He was setting a trap for Marco. But the betrayal ran deeper and moved faster than he had anticipated. While Dante was preparing his countermove, the world fell apart. She was in her room, reading, when the door opened. It wasn't the quiet woman with her food. It was 2 men she didn't recognize, their faces hard. Before she could scream, a hand was clamped over her mouth, and a sharp, chemical scent filled her senses. Her last conscious thought was of Dante's face, the brief, unguarded moment of tenderness in his eyes. He had been planning to trap his enemy, but the enemy had moved first, taking the one thing he had just realized he could not bear to lose. Consciousness returned in fragments. The rough texture of a burlap sack over her head. The smell of damp concrete and rust. the cold seeping into her bones from the floor. When they finally pulled the sack off, she was in a vast, empty warehouse. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows. A man sat on a chair opposite her. He was younger than Dante, with a cruel mouth and the arrogant posture of a man who had never been told no. This was Leo Falcone. "So you're the old woman who has Dante Moretti so distracted," he sneered, his eyes roving over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I have to say, I don't see the appeal." Eleanor said nothing. She focused on her breathing, on keeping the terror that was clawing at her throat from showing on her face. She would not give him the satisfaction. "He's sentimental," Leo continued, circling her chair. "He lost his wife, and he thinks he's found a replacement. But all he's found is a weakness. And I'm going to use you to tear him apart." He left her there, tied to the chair in the echoing darkness. Hours passed. She fought against the ropes, but they were tight, cutting into her wrists. Panic was a useless indulgence. She had to think. She had survived in Dante's world by seeing things others missed. She had to do it again. When one of Leo's men came in to check on her, she spoke. "Your boss is making a mistake." The guard grunted. "Shut up. He thinks he's in control." Eleanor pressed on, her voice calm and academic, as if she were delivering a lecture. "But he's a pawn. Marco, the man who gave me to you, he's playing you both. Once Dante is dead, who do you think Marco will come for next? The man who helped him commit treason." She was planting a seed. A historian knows that empires don't just fall from outside attack. They rot from within, from paranoia and betrayal. The guard hesitated. She saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. She had hit a nerve. Meanwhile, Dante was tearing the city apart. The loss of Eleanor was a cold, silent fury that radiated from him, terrifying his own men. Marco's betrayal was now confirmed in the most brutal way imaginable. There would be no quiet justice. There would only be war. He used every resource, every informant, every ounce of his brutal intelligence to locate the warehouse district where the Falcones were known to operate. When Dante and his men stormed the warehouse, they expected a firefight. Instead, they found chaos. Because of Eleanor's words, suspicion had already spread like a virus among the Falcone crew. The guard she had spoken to had gone to Leo's younger brother, planting the same seeds of doubt. The Falcone family was already turning on itself. Eleanor had created the opening. The violence was still swift, brutal, and absolute. Dante moved through it like a wraith, his focus singular, finding her. He found her in the center of the chaos, just as Leo Falcone lunged for her, using her as a shield. But Eleanor was not a passive victim. She drove her heel back into Leo's shin with all her might. He roared in pain, his grip loosening for a split second. It was all the time Dante needed. In the aftermath, standing amidst the wreckage and the silence of the dead, Dante went to her. He cut the ropes from her wrists with a knife, his touch gentle. He pulled her to her feet, his hands on her arms, his eyes scanning her for any injury. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "No," she whispered, her body trembling with adrenaline. He held her then, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her against his chest. It was not a kiss. It was something more elemental. A claim. A promise. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in as if she were air. They drove back to the penthouse in silence. The city lights seemed different now, sharper, more fragile. Back in the silent apartment, he tended to the raw, red marks the ropes had left on her wrists. His touch was careful, almost reverent. The violence of his world had marked her, and the guilt in his eyes was profound. He finished bandaging her wrists and stood up, walking over to the portrait of his late wife. He stared at it for a long moment, his back to her. "When she died," he said, his voice heavy, "the world lost its color. Everything became a copy, a forgery of what I once had." He turned to face her, and the cold, controlled mask of Dante Moretti was entirely gone. All that was left was the man, raw and exposed. "I looked at you that first night, and for the first time in 8 years, I saw something authentic," He crossed the room and stopped in front of her. He gently took her hands in his. "Sophia's portrait," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she could name. "It is a painting of a woman I loved. A single, beautiful piece." His dark eyes held hers. "But you, Eleanor, you are the gallery. The entire collection. Priceless and real." It was the most honest, beautiful declaration he was capable of making. It was not a promise of an easy life or a safe one. It was a statement of her value, her meaning, in his dark, broken world. He did not ask her to stay. He did not need to. The question hung in the air between them, more powerful than any words. What now? He simply stood there, holding her hands, offering her the truth of what he was. A protector. A killer. A man who had found something real in the wreckage of his life. Eleanor looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. She saw the scar above his eye, the silver in his hair, the shadows in his soul. She knew what choosing him meant. It meant stepping out of the light forever. It meant a life where danger was a constant companion. She thought of her quiet office, her books, her orderly, predictable world. It felt like a photograph of a life someone else had lived. Slowly, deliberately, she squeezed his hand. The choice was made. Not for a happy ending, but for a life that was, like her, undeniably real.